Welcome to our May webinar, Smarter Records and Better Outcomes in Sage 300. We're going to unlock Orchid's document management link, notes, and extender. Does your team hunt for documents in context every time they process a Sage 300 transaction? You're struggling to track down details on accruals and reversals? Do auditors keep asking for more details on your accounts and transactions? Are provision, methodology, assumptions, and calculations kept outside Sage 300? Still fixing coding errors, the wrong account, company, or project? With Notes, Document Management Link, and Extender, we can achieve advanced collaboration and greater control to help with audit readiness and time savings. You can create, locate, update, and share information in intuitive and powerful ways, and it is seamlessly integrated into your everyday use of Sage 300. Increase audit readiness as explanations and documents are captured at the time you're entering or posting the transactions. You also have knowledge continuity where the context stays with the data, not in someone's head. So whether somebody leaves or whether processes are split between different team members that may not be sitting in the same location, the context is in the data and available on the screens. You can then achieve faster close cycles because the reviewers and approvers have the answers as they are checking the transactions. And at the same time, you have fewer errors and stronger internal controls. Your notes can act as guardrails and warnings to ensure you're using the screens, the processes, and the transactions the right way, and you can capture explanations and documents down to the line level, at quite a low level of detail. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at real scenarios spanning every department. We're going to look at purchasing and payment processes using Notes and Document Management Link and how we can control those documents. Look at speeding up audits and month-end close with Notes and documents, focusing on GL accounts and GL transactions. We will do demonstration in Sage 300 of those scenarios and then show how we can apply the same wins to projects, banks, and EFT records and other records in Sage 300. So all these scenarios will highlight the breadth and flexibility across all departments, and we'd really like to appeal to your creativity so you get new ideas how to streamline Sage 300 processes and make everyday life easier for Sage 300 users, finance managers, and auditors. We will generally start with examples using Notes and Document Management Link only, and we then show you how Extender can help tailor this configuration even further. We will point to the configuration required, but this is not a detailed training. Detailed training is available in the help, and we can of course organize specific training sessions for scenarios that you would like to learn more about for yourselves or for your customers and prospects. Document Management Link and Notes are designed for every department, but let's start with looking at them one at a time. We're going to start with the finance team and purchase orders and accounts payable, invoices and payments processes, as this is often the first point of entry for using Notes and Document Management Link. And with this, I will hand over to Anne.
The Document Management Link configuration can use up to 2 fields from the source screen to name and create the folders and libraries for the documents, as well as for the files themselves. And Document Management Link can be configured for both the Sage 300 web screens and the Sage 300 desktop screens. So when we're thinking about purchase orders or accounts payable invoices, the fields that you can use in the document file name and or the folder or SharePoint library is the vendor number, the document number, the reference if appropriate, or description. So any one of these fields can be used, and up to 2 to keep track of your document. And the scenario we're going to look at is that the users want to add invoice documents when entering purchase order invoices and accounts payable invoices. And then they want to view them on the vendor activity screen and on the AP payment entry screen. And they're using both the desktop screens as well as the web screens. DML has been configured so we can attach the AP invoice at the time of PO invoice entry or at the time of the AP invoice entry. So assuming that we have just received this invoice from Coastal Electric for purchase order number 59, we can go ahead and attach it. So if we go ahead and enter the invoice number, the vendor number, and select the receipt to apply this particular invoice to, and we'll select the receipt we have done for purchase order 59. And assuming these values are all correct, we can go ahead and post this document. So we can either attach the document before we post or after we post. It doesn't matter to DML. So we can click here and explore and find the document if it's on a scanned folder, or we can drag and drop it out of the email. So if I wanted to keep the entire email body as well, so I'm using the Outlook client, if I want to keep the entire email as well as the attachment, I can just drag it in like that. And you can see that the attachment has been renamed based on the invoice number. Or if I only wanted, if I wanted the individual invoice PDF as well, I could attach it in as well. So we'll go ahead and post that particular invoice. And the same process can be done in accounts payable if your invoices are entered in AP. So we can attach the invoice documentation here as well. So let's do this one by adding from a folder on our drive. So we've got a scan drive with some invoices, and we can drag it in. And again, it's going to be renamed based on the invoice number that we have entered on the screen. And when these batches are posted and they reach the AP vendor inquiry, for example, for vendor 1200, we can see all the invoices. When we go to the transactions and highlight an individual transaction, we see the documents that are associated with that document number, as well as all. So this is by choice. We've chosen to see this. And we can also attach documents to payments as well. And these documents are still accessible and visible at the time of AP payment entry. As we are clicking on the individual invoices, you can see the documentation associated with that transaction number appearing here. So the attached documents from the PO invoice entry or the AP invoice entry are still viewable in the vendor activity and in the AP payment entry on any screen where you see the vendor number and the document number at the same time. And the same configuration can be done for the web screens. So here for purchase order invoice entry, we are looking at the same vendor invoice that we've just keyed in on the desktop screens, and we see the two files that we dragged in from our email. And we could add further documents here if appropriate. And similarly for accounts payable, we are looking at vendor 1200, and we see all the invoices for vendor 1200, including the individual invoice that we're currently looking at, which is invoice 12-1. We're seeing that particular document here. And the same applies to our vendor activity. Looking at vendor 1200, we see all the documents, but if we go onto the transaction screen and highlight the individual documents, we're now seeing A0001 documents, move on to IN 120212, and so on. And similarly, in the AP payment entry for the current vendor that you're looking at, in my case 1400, and depending on the configuration and the documents you're looking at, we are now seeing all the invoices for vendor 1400 plus the documents associated with INV 2026-05-16. And the configuration that is needed for this, for the desktop screens, for purchase order invoice entry, if we want to display the individual invoice based on the vendor number and document number, we would configure for the PO 1400, which is the purchase invoice entry screen, and we would have the field label 1 as vendor number, field label 2 as invoice number, and those values are used in our filter, and we're showing all the documents that start with the invoice number. And for the AP invoice entry, we have two DML boxes configured, one for the individual invoice and one for all the documents associated with the vendor. So for the individual invoice, very similar to the PO, but the screen is AP 2100, and we're filtering the folder containing the vendor number for all the documents, starting with the document number field. And for the list of documents for the vendor, we are just showing all the contents of the vendor's folder. And for the web screens, we're still looking at the same folder by vendor number. And for the PO invoice screen, we are showing one box of documents, and it is filtering the vendor's folder for all the documents starting with the invoice number. And very similarly for the AP invoice entry, except this time we're showing two boxes. The first one is filtering the vendor's folder for documents starting with the document number. And the second one, we're showing all the documents in the vendor's folder. And looking at the vendor activity screen, we are showing two boxes. The first one is filtering all the documents starting with the document number. And the second one, we're showing all the documents in the vendor's folder. And in AP payment entry, in the first box, we're showing all the documents starting with the applied document number from the grid. And the second box, we're showing all the vendor's invoices.
Thanks, Anne. And after this detailed presentation on using document management link with AP invoices and PO invoices, let's look at how this can apply to AP miscellaneous payments.
So when we look at accounts payable payment entry for the miscellaneous payments, we could be using the vendor number, the invoice number, or the document number or a reference number on the desktop screens, and using the same fields on the web screens, although they may have a different name on the web screens. And in this demonstration, what we're going to do is configure the miscellaneous payments so that you can add invoices when entering the miscellaneous payments, and the documents will be saved in a folder per vendor and will be named according to the invoice number. And we want to keep multiple documents, one per distribution line of the miscellaneous invoice that gets created when you do a miscellaneous payment. And these users use both the desktop screens as well as the web screens. Having a look at how this would work in practice, if I look at the Sage 300 desktop screens first, and go and create a miscellaneous payment. You can see for this particular screen, I have configured the vendor number and invoice number to have documents in the top box, and then per line, I have configured the vendor number, invoice number to have documents in this middle box, And the bottom box we've configured to show some documents relating to the current bank. So assuming I have the documents already on a network folder, I could go to Add and then drag and drop from the Scan Documents folder or whatever folder that you have those documents in. Or if you do have the documents in your local Outlook client, we can drag and drop from there. So in my case, I want to drag the entire email into the top box and then the individual attachments, one per line, relating to the individual miscellaneous invoice detail lines. So first I'm going to drag in the invoice. So when I drag in the entire email message, it does actually drag in the message plus the attachments, and you can see it has been relabeled based on the invoice number that is in the screen. And then if I highlight each of the lines in turn, so this is the amount for the electrical works, and I want to pick up the electrical PDF and drag it in. You can see it's renamed it based on the reference field here, where I had keyed in the invoice number and then the particular reference I want for that particular line. And when I move on to the next line for the actual unit itself, I can drag in the invoice relating to the unit. And similarly, I can do for the installation. Now these documents you will see are actually being stored in the same folder as the one for the invoice number, but they just have an extended file name. And when our view is refreshed, you can see in our vendor number, invoice number folder, we have all the documents. But as we click through and make active the individual grid lines, you will see the specific document for that particular line. And once that batch is posted, these documents are visible on AP Vendor Activity. So at the vendor level, we see all the documents we have associated for that vendor. But if we go through and select that individual miscellaneous payment and look at the documents, you see the original configuration. So all the documents relating to that particular invoice number and the individual payment lines here. So when we click through them, we see the electrical, the unit costs, and the installation and commission costs. And if we do the same configuration for our web screens, you can see at a header level, we have those same documents. And we also have the configuration, the bank file for the CCC bank. And if we make this a bit bigger and look at the individual lines, once the line is activated, we see the associated document, electrical, the unit itself, and our installation and commission documents. And on the web screens, just as we can on the desktop screens, the tray can be made as wide as you need to see the documents, column widths as well if you're using long document names. And similarly, using the web screens, if you go to the vendor activity, at the vendor level, you can see all the documents associated with the vendor, including our ones for the miscellaneous payment. And if you go through to the miscellaneous payment and open up that document, you now see the original AP payment entry screen with the details that we saw earlier. So all the documents at the top level, and then once we click through the individual detail lines, we get the individual documents. The configuration required for the desktop screens, so where we saw for the vendor, we have the invoice documents all in the top box and then the individual line box in the second box. And the configuration was to store all the vendor documents in a folder per vendor. So the configuration needed for this was, we are saying that for document management link for the AP 3100 screen, which is the payment entry screen, we're going to use the vendor number as value 1 and the invoice number as value 2. So in this case, 1400 and INV 2026-05-16. And then the folder is going to be C Orchid Custom Documents, AP Documents, then the vendor number, and then the invoice number. And in this box, we're going to display all the documents starting with the invoice number. So value 2, star, is starting with the invoice number. And that's what we see here. And when we dragged and dropped the email message in, it renamed it invoice number. And this is where the renaming is, taking the invoice number and renaming it as we dragged and dropped this document into the document management link box. And then for the second box, where we have the individual document per line highlighted, we can see that it's the same path, but this time the filter is on all the documents starting with value 2, which is the grid reference field. So that is why we see the electrical document when that line is highlighted, and if we were to highlight this line, we would see reverse cycle unit and then the install and commission document. And the configuration is very similar for the web screens. So we're addressing the same folder. We saw the documents were shared across the two. And for the first box, which is showing all the miscellaneous payment invoice records, we can see that the field label value is vendor number and the second field label is invoice number. And it's exactly the same configuration row as we saw for the web screen, for the desktop screens, except it's not Roto ID 2100. It is now Roto, it's the web screen name, AP Payment Entry. And we're doing the same renaming. And for the middle box, it's still AP Payment Entry being the screen. The value is vendor number, but this time the value 2 is G.reference, which is the grid reference value, which showed the invoice number, dash, and electrical or install and commission and reverse cycle unit. So that is why it is able to highlight this individual document. And the renaming as well is based on the value in the reference field.
Thanks, Anne. In our second scenario, we will build on this example and see how we can use Extender to validate that we have documents before posting the transactions. We're again going to use AP invoices at the example, but the same validation can apply to other records. In this example, we're looking at our AP invoice entry again. I've entered my invoice for vendor Torrington, document number. When I try and save that document, same if I'm adding it, I get a warning message that there is no document for this invoice. It will still let me save it in case I need to go and find the relevant information. However, at the time of trying to post that batch, I'm actually getting an error. This is how we've configured it. We prompt the users to enter the document at the time that they're entering the transaction or updating it, but we stop them from posting, so to finalize the transaction until the document has been entered. This is by choice, and we'll show you how to do that quickly. So now, if I go back and add my invoice for Torrington, I can save normal warning message, and I can post my batch. So what's behind the scene? It's Extender, it's an application. There is configuration, but no actual scripting coding. It is all part of the Orchid DML validation app. And once you've imported the module, the way you configure it is looking at the custom table editor. You just need to choose, what am I trying to validate? Do I validate all documents, invoice, credit note, debit note, interest, or just invoices? Do I validate all source application, AP and PO, or do I only validate the AP invoices? And then you put the path where you think the documents are going to be. In our example, matching what we have in document management link, it's a folder per vendor, and the invoice is renamed based on the invoice number. And here, being the batch, I've actually got an error. But if I look at entering the transaction, so when I'm updating or inserting the new invoice, I've used the same configuration, so I'm validating all invoices and all transactions created, same path, but I'm only doing a warning. So this is where you could change it to be an error as you're entering the transaction. So smarter documents, better control, and easy to configure, and it can be done as step 2 after getting used to document management link. In our first example, we've focused on the finance team and the payments vendor processes. Now we're still going to stay with the finance team, but we're going to look at it in the context of the general ledger. How we can add long account descriptions to GL accounts through notes, and how we can add notes and documents when we're entering GL transactions. For this presentation, we use the web screens, providing a nice browser interface accessible from many different machines, and my finance team likes to use it, particularly for GL transactions. So as part of the close, they sometimes need to enter accrued expenses. So to enter this accrual, we're going to use our payables clearing account, and as the manager, the first thing I want to do is make sure I have a specific note about what to do when we use this account. You can see our icon is available here. We haven't entered a note yet. So I can add note that we need to record the basis of all the accruals and details on when to reverse if necessary. So I'm going to save this one. And now I can go and enter, or another team member really is going to go and enter the batch. So it's not yet invoiced, so I'm going to use my clearing account. And as I'm selecting the account, you see the note that we've just entered shows up. So I have all the information that I need for this particular account. If need be, I can also add this description to a GL journal. And to record the reason for this transaction, I have access to this box here where I configured it to add a document. So I can add a document by just selecting folder where I have my quote for insurance. But what is happening in this situation is I've also received an email from my manager that we haven't yet received the invoice, but we've accepted a quote and it's going to be an expense this year. So I can drag the whole email here. Again, it will rename it based on the batch and entry number. This is how I've configured it, and I have the message. So any other user looking at this GL journal subsequently, or when the auditor check the accruals, expenses, they can come here, double click and view the PDF or view the whole email message. So instructions on what to do when using this GL account, and ability to record as I'm entering the transaction, the documents that support that GL journal. Let's create a new entry for our bad debt provision. In my allowance for doubtful debts account is 1190-1, and I have entered a note there telling me what to do when using this specific account. This is not just about the screen and what to do when entering a GL journal, but this is what we need to record, methodology to calculate the doubtful debt. If I save this entry, I'm going to save the email that I've received from Nathan, my manager, telling me to enter this transaction. And the email message is there ready for anyone to look. I do have an indication here that there are notes associated with this and documents associated with this journal. So in this example, we demonstrate that we can easily enter information that help the team enter the right information. It's going to be training and guardrails against mistakes. And then we can record the supporting evidence at the time of entering the transactions. That evidence can be a document, but it can also be a note. Now in our next example, we're going to move back to the Sage desktop screens, and we're going to look at enhancing this further by using Extender and the optional field Grid app, so that we can more easily record values for optional fields and configure notes in DML for accounts in projects optional field. Let's look at our GL transaction listing. And in this example, we're looking at work in progress. And what I've done here is I do have a long description for account 1340-1, which is my work in progress account, with a note to transfer fixed assets register when project ANA is complete. As you can see in this journal, I do have account, I have my description, my amount, but I can also select a project in an entity while in the grid. Now behind this, we actually have an optional field, but instead of having to click and open the optional fields and select, we've actually used Extender to add this project optional field to the grid, so it's much easier to enter. If this is defined as a finder in the Sage Common Services area, then I can select it with the finder. If not, I can just type it. I can also link Entity 1's project to a list of valid projects, so I can build that validation between the different optional fields using the Extender optional field Grid app. And as we can see, we also have some specific GL project notes for this account and this project. If I enter some other expenses, as I'm selecting account 1340-1, I have some notes, detailed description about this GL account. I can select my amount, and I can select my project. And as I'm selecting the project, I have some notes that have been pre-entered as well, that I need to reallocate after 3 months. So these notes can be entered as I'm entering the transaction, if I have the appropriate security rights, or as a manager, I can also pre-enter the notes so that users know what to do. Now I've finished entering my journal, and save And again, as previously, these notes can be added to a GL transaction listing documents because everything is held in the database, or exported for the auditors, or the auditors can see the notes as they're actually going through the accounts. In our Information Manager options for notes in DML, I have a configuration here for account and project. So it's based on my field on the grid. And in parallel, in my Extender app, to add optional fields to the grid, I do have a few configuration, and we're going to look at the one for project. So that's tell me project, and I've also got the one for the entity. And I could add some validations to ensure that I can only select the right project for the right entity as well. So it's another example of using Extender to improve, to facilitate the data entry, particularly with optional fields, add some validation, and support our ongoing effort to document the transactions as they are being entered. And all this will help with audit readiness and knowledge continuity in particular. So we've demonstrated examples of smarter controls and better outcomes in AP, PO, GL. We can apply the same wins to other departments. Sales orders, we're entering OE orders, bank transactions, EFT, customer, vendor, employee records, RMA returns. We won't show you all these detailed presentations today, but let's have a look at a few examples in action on the screenshots. Seen during the presentation, we can add screen-specific instructions and procedures which help faster staff training, reduce mistakes, and again, it's all part of this knowledge continuity, knowledge being in the system rather than in everyone's head. We have seen an example of using long description for GL account. We can use notes for long descriptions of IC items. Those notes can then be included in reports. They can also be displayed on the relevant screen in OE or in PO, or when processing some IC transactions. This is an example on the desktop screens, and a similar example on the web screens where we are seeing the item notes, so the long description, visible when entering our order transaction. That note can be included in a crystal report form, your order confirmation, your invoice, and it can even be a hyperlink to an image saved where the path to that image is saved in a note. And then you can use this to add the image to the order confirmation or the invoice. So there's a lot of possibilities there to further enhance how you use the order entry. We have demonstrated this a few times. It is part of Orchid's sample data, where sales admin using the desktop screens can view a lot of documents and information around the order, everything that is relevant. Number one, all the previous customer invoices and purchase orders. In our second box, we can view the order-specific related documents. So that would be typically the customer's purchase order and maybe the order confirmation. We can also see the last time the customer credit limit was changed. And such a note is what we call part of advanced logging. It requires Extender that can automatically create a note when the credit limit changes, and you can then display that note wherever you need, in this example on the order entry screen. We're also using Extender in number 4 and 5 to display some content on the fly. Here we're looking at our total sales for this customer and item sales for that customer by item, giving us the average price as well. So we can add notes and documents to any two field combinations on the screen, including fields in the grid. And number 6 is documents relating to the item. Number 7 is item notes, as we have just seen for a long description. So these are just examples in highlighting the flexibility that we have. This is configurable, so it is not just clutter. You choose what is relevant for how your business processes run. And when entering order shipments, we're also showing previous customer invoices through Document Management Link. And we're using Extender to display back orders as well as AR aging and credit status. And you can drill down to more details from these aging bucket. This is running the Sage aging and credit status process. So we're not reconstituting, we are using the Sage logic to display the information that you need when processing orders. This is currently available on the desktop screens only, but we are working on an update and it will be available on the web screens very shortly. Moving on to projects, we can attach documents and notes to project and job costing. So PJC, there could be agreements by subcontractor, by employee. For example, we can store the qualifications and SLA agreements with our contractors and employees. And they can be surfaced when we are processing AP vendor transactions for those subcontractors and employees. Using Orchid's EFT, we can also attach documents to the EFT customer or the EFT vendor. In this example, we are attaching the mandate for direct debit contract and SEPA mandates. They're stored in DML and they're visible on the EFT desktop screens here and on the web screens as well. Here we have example using Document Management Link with bank services. So as you're creating a bank transfer, you can attach the relevant document. Could be your manager asking you to do this transfer, justifying based on the current exchange rates why we need to do this transfer now. And those documents, as instructions for the bank entries, can then be visible when you're doing your bank rec. And we can also attach the statement to our statement reconciliation. When looking at the breadth and flexibility of what we can do with Notes and Document Management Link, one thing comes up clearly is that it increases your audit readiness. Because we're entering your transaction, you can capture the context, the reasoning on the documents at the time of entering or posting and not reconstituted months later. The processing notes are visible to every team member, what to do, what not to do, which helps with meeting the auditor's requirements. The documentation lives in the system, not in a person's head, so the approvers, the managers can answer their own question. And for example, when the auditors ask their questions, they can view the notes and the documents when they're checking the transactions. Everything is online, so it is easier to share than your paper folders. You can export the notes or you can include them in GL transaction listing reports and they can read the notes at the same time. And you can also then adapt your processes in response to the auditor's feedback. So in summary, we've seen a lot of examples. Some of them are easy to roll out in small phases. Try in one department, try and process and see the wins for yourself. Enjoy the audit readiness, knowledge continuity, faster close cycles, fewer coding errors and stronger internal controls by implementing one or a combination of Notes, Document Management Link and Extender. A little bit more detail about Document Management Link, which lets you access easily documents from Sage 300 screens. It helps with customer interactions and audit readiness. Your documents are just one click away. You can file, locate, and retrieve documents without leaving Sage 300. No more reliance on physical files, which obviously helps with remote work. Knowledge continuity across the team. When a transaction moves from one team member to another, when a team member leaves, the information is there, which helps with faster processing and faster close cycles, as the evidence is captured at the moment of posting the transaction. We have very flexible configuration. You choose how and where the document links appear. It can be any Sage 300 screen, desktop, web screens, as well as third-party SDK modules such as EFT or Simply Manufacturing. It is context sensitive and you can link up to 2 fields. For example, vendor and item, vendor and document number. It is easy to configure and start with a small project. You have different document sharing options. The documents are not stored in the database, so there is no impact on your database size or performance. Documents can reside in a shared network folder, including folders synced to cloud-based file sharing services. And on the desktop screens, you can also use SharePoint. You can link documents by dragging and dropping, including emails coming from Outlook. Notes, which is great for instructions, warnings, and context for Sage 300 screens, helps for better collaboration, saves time, improves customer service as the information is right there. And you don't have to rely on offline notes kept outside of Sage 300. It cuts costly mistakes and helps onboard new team members faster as they have context-sensitive data entry guidance. Very similar flexible configuration to Document Management Link, attached to any Sage screens and third-party SDK modules. You can link up to 2 fields and you can add rich text hyperlinks. Importantly, you have security and role-based rules to control who sees what, which helps with security of the information and also ensures a clutter-free setup. So you're not seeing an item node just because an item node has been configured. Now we've shown a few examples of using Extender to push this flexibility even further. With Document Management Link, you can use Extender to automate document creation. The PDFs, order confirmation, invoice, purchase orders can be auto-generated and saved in the right folder. You don't need to drag and drop, no need to manually export the Crystal report and save it. You can email the order confirmation or the invoice automatically to customers or the purchase orders to vendor. We have seen an example of validation for greater control, where you can warn users or block the posting if you don't have all the supporting documents. Extender can also help with an easier use of optional fields, where you can update the optional fields directly in the Sage 300 grid. And you can then configure documents at a granular level, your GL account and their optional field, or item and optional field, or customer and optional field, with an easier user experience. Notes and Extender also work very well together. You can have advanced logging, where Extender creates a note when a field changes, and then you use Notes to display the last change in the relevant Sage 300 screen. So your logging isn't just hidden in a log table, it is shown where relevant. You have more flexibility in building your notes content and less clutter, because you can write conditional notes, only show the note if certain conditions are met, build on-the-fly notes that can include drill down to open some transactions from order entry, or integrate to external applications, for example, request current exchange rates or freight charges. And like with Document Management Link, Extender can help with easier use of optional fields that you update directly in the grid, and you can then configure notes against these columns in the grid more easily. A lot of the examples we have looked at are documented in the online help and the various video presentations that we have on the website. So please have a look, ask us questions, and we can do a more detailed training based on the scenarios that are relevant to you and your customers. Now we're ready for Q&A.